Do you know that a green card holder cannot file for their siblings, but a U.S. citizen can file for their siblings, but it's going to take about 15, almost 17 years for that visa to actually happen? Let's talk about immigration while I start some seeds. All right, so in today's Plan and Learn, we are going to be talking about U.S. citizens, who they can file for, because there's so much misinformation in the news about who can actually get a visa to the U.S. and how quickly they can get said visa to the U.S. So I have heard that U.S. citizens can basically file for their entire family to come to the U.S. and it takes no time at all. And then they have a whole tribe of people from their family in the U.S. If only that was true, my clients will be happy, okay, that they could file for their entire family. But that's not true. So let's take a U.S. citizen. A U.S. citizen can file for their siblings, their parents, their spouse, and their children, regardless of the age and marital status of the child. Okay, they can file for them. That's what U.S. citizens can do. And of course, they can file for a fiancé, right? But a permanent resident cannot file for their siblings. They cannot file for their parents. They cannot file for their fiance, and they cannot file for their married children. So if their children are married, they cannot file for them. And if they file for the child and then the child gets married before the parent becomes a citizen, the application basically gets nullified. It gets canceled out. So what can you actually do? Okay, what can you actually do? When it comes to a U.S. citizen, this is habanero. Oh, probably shouldn't touch that with my bare hands. But when it comes to U.S. citizens, right, when you want to file for your siblings, you really need to be aware of how long the whole process is going to take. I am so sorry, but it's not a quick process. Like, I always love listening to news where they'll be like, oh, you know, anchor babies and da 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 da. This person can just bring their entire family to the U.S. and it's such a quick process. The U.S. needs more guardrails. There's so much guardrails, you guys. So much guardrails. It's not even funny. So let's start from the beginning. A U.S. citizen can file for their parents. Their parents are considered immediate relatives. They can file for their siblings. Their siblings are not considered immediate relatives. They can file for their children, but if their children are over the age of 21 or married, they are not considered immediate relatives. Okay? And if you are not considered an immediate relative, that means it is going to take some time. Quite some time for a visa to be available for you to then be able to come to the U.S. So it is not as quick as the news may make it out to be. It is not as easy as the news may make it out to be, okay? People are going years and years and years, decades, without having their family in the U.S. because, and this is because, a visa is not available. And the reason they're going decades and decades without their family in the U.S. with them is because a visa is not available. When you are filing for siblings, your parents or your children over the age of 21 that are married, there is something called the Visa Bulletin. Okay? The Visa Bulletin lets you know who, right? Not only who you can file for, but it lets you know when you can actually get them to the U.S. That's the crazy part about the Visa Bulletin that people don't know. is that just because you can file for your siblings doesn't mean that they get to come to the U.S. immediately. So siblings, for example, is taken about, right now they're processing cases that were filed in 2008. Okay, so we are in 2024. They're processing applications from 2008. So think about that the next time someone tells you, oh, people come here and then they can file for their siblings and blah, 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 blah. No, yes, they can file for their siblings once they become a U.S. citizen, right? Once they become a U.S. citizen, yes, they can file for their siblings, but their siblings are not getting a visa quickly, okay? There's a whole process that they have to go through, and there's a whole waiting period to just get them here. So when people say that, it really aggravates me, because they really, it tells me that they don't know how U.S. immigration works, especially when it's like people in the news that say it. I'm like, oh, you guys really don't know how this works. I wish you would, actually ask an immigration lawyer how this whole thing works, because that's not how it works. Okay, so just because you're a U.S. citizen, if you get nothing else out of this, just because you're a U.S. citizen doesn't mean that you get to file for every single person you know. It does mean you can file for certain family members, but depending on who the family member is, it could take decades before they can actually get here to the U.S. So next time someone asks you, oh, why haven't you brought me to the U.S.? If you're a U.S. citizen with family outside of the U.S. and your cousin calls you and asks you why you haven't, why can't you file for them to come to the U.S., send them this video, because you can't. Okay, you cannot file for cousins. You can file for siblings. You can file for parents. You can file for children, but you definitely cannot file for nieces and nephews. You cannot file for cousins. You cannot file for grandparents. Okay, it's a whole thing. And I've had people ask me this question on multiple occasions. So I'm like, let me do a whole video where I break it down, because somebody out there is getting harassed. Okay, some of you out there are getting harassed by family members that want you to file for them, but don't actually understand how U.S. immigration works. Hope this helps.